Good morning to folks on the call here. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got a very fun and super exciting topic to cover today over the next 45 minutes or so from a multitude of teams here at Sprocket. We'll go ahead and get started with some super quick introductions, and then we can just sort of dive right into all manners of bypassing security controls, finding legacy endpoints, and talk a little bit more about how hackers and real threat actors compromise environments. So to start off with, my name is Nate Fair. I am a senior pen tester here at Sprocket on the service delivery team. I've been here a little over 4 years now. I spend most of my day doing just that, hacking in all manners across all different types of environments, web applications, external and internal NetPen, all of the fun stuff. And so today's topic and conversation, like my other panelists here, is very near and dear to my heart. So, with that being said, I'll just sort of go clockwise, and I see Ron is up next. So, Ron, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Ron Edgerson. I'm a principal penetration tester at Sprocket. Been here about maybe 10, 11 months. Had a lot of fun. I'm having fun. Hack all the things, whatever you name it, research, all that. I love it. I love hacking with these guys. They're just super awesome. So, yeah, that's me. Pass it over to Nick.
Hey guys, my name is Nick Hours, also a senior pen tester here at Sprocket, and I've been here. Me and Ron actually joined together basically, so around the same amount of time, and pretty much took my sentence there. Ron, hack all the things, right? That's what we're all doing here. That's the goal is to hack all the things before the bad guys do. So, remote guy here, based out of Buffalo, New York. Just happy to be chatting with you guys today. This is a good one. I will pass it off to Topher.
Hi, my name is Topher Lyons. I am a solutions engineer here at Sprocket. Forgot my own job title for a second. I also started the same week as you guys, believe it or not. So this is like a reunion. But I couldn't make it out to Wisconsin. So I am out in California, Paso Robles, but I'm currently in a hotel in Los Angeles because I had a work event. And apparently, I can't do Sprocket webinars unless I'm in a hotel because the last one I was in a hotel in San Francisco. So, my background, I'm what you would call a legacy pen tester. I was on the Air Force Red Team for a number of years, done private consulting and pen testing, also purple teaming and network engineering. But I haven't done like a lot of hands-on keyboard outside of bug bounties and some simple stuff in a few years. So I'm here for historical context.
Yeah, well, today I learned that I'm the youngest, oldest man here at the on the team. I've been here the longest, but I think I'm the youngest. So it's what we like to do at Sprocket. We're all mixing everything up. So
Go ahead, rub it in, Nate. Go ahead.
yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
All right. Well, like mentioned at the beginning, thanks again everybody for joining. I'm going to actually send a link in the Zoom chat, and I want everybody to take a look at that and take a look at the author's name. His name is Dirkjan Malena, and if you're not familiar with him, he's one of the very few security researchers that you should set up your Google alerts for, right? When this guy has a blog post come out, you should stop what you're doing and you should read it, especially if you are in a Windows or any if your environment touches Windows in any way, that should be your guy. And what better way to illustrate that with reading that blog post? And I'll happily summarize it for you. This is released earlier this week, is by far the most severe and critical vulnerability in Entra ID, Azure, probably in the Microsoft ecosystem that probably will ever exist. And that is because during the course of his research, he discovered legacy API functionality in a very much not talked about, very under discussed function between different portions of Entra. And it's actually uses the legacy Azure AD Graph API. And he discovered that you can basically talk to any any tenant in the Azure AD environments using a forged token or something that he call or something that's called actor tokens. And using these actor tokens, you could, for example, set up your own lab internally, and then you could use that token to talk and query and log in and completely compromise any other tenant in the in Entra ID. There's no logging, there's no alerts, right? Because there's no logging. And so, right, I mean, being able to impersonate any user, including global admins and any other tenant around the world without any form of logging or detection capability, is, I mean, that is the absolute top tier, right? And Microsoft, they said they fixed it in, I guess, sort of, classic Microsoft fashion. Nothing to worry about here. Again, there's no logging. They say, that there's no evidence of exploitation. How do you prove that, right? But I guess to bring all of that back again, I think, we're talking about bypassing security controls. And when you have your sort of primary, super secure authentication system that in this case would just be the regular graph API, right? How do attackers bypass that? Well, in some cases, that bypass looks like attacking legacy versions of that same API. And so I just think, that what better way to highlight how important it is to not only know where your assets are, the functionality that those assets have, and being able to talk to other environments and systems within the larger system is, I mean, it's paramount, right? And I try and think, how does a company solve that? Especially one as big as Microsoft? And my answer is going to be, hire pen testers. These are the people who this is what we do, right? We find this all the time. We find this stuff all the time. And so I just think, what better way to highlight, how attackers bypass security controls. Sometimes you don't need to go against the fortified front door if there's, an unlocked window. So I don't know. There's me in my initial sort of soapbox on how cool it is. Sometimes again, you don't need to do the hardest thing that you need. Attackers again are usually lazy and they're going to go for the weakest link. So um, I know a couple of our other team members here had a chance to read that. Curious if anybody who's also listening, what one, I hope that this is not the first that you're hearing this. And if it is, and you're in Intra, um, you're patched, but you should, again, put a Google alert, which I do, by the way, and on a number of things, a Google alert on his name, and then of course any other things that you have, in your environment. But yeah, I mean, you guys, I don't know, is it too big of a statement to say that's the craziest and biggest vulnerability that will likely ever exist unless he finds a bypass for that? I mean, right? Like how much worse can you get than global admin takeover of any Entra account completely unauthenticated with no logging? I mean, that's just mind blow, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I know. Go ahead, Topher, please.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting. The exploit itself is not that interesting, right? But it's very pervasive, right? And that's just indicative of the world that we're in, is that so many organizations are in Entra. This is something that's accessible from a public perspective. And so I don't know, to answer your question, right? I think like the concept, like the concept behind the exploit, it's, might be interesting to some people. I shouldn't have just blanket said it's not that interesting, but there are a lot more technically
Yeah.
advanced exploits out there that are pretty cool, right? But as we like migrate to the cloud, as we virtualize everything, as everything becomes containerized and in somebody else's hands, right? Like you pointed out, this is Microsoft. I don't know if this is be the most like mind-blowing one, because there'll probably be one in the not too distant future, right? So, but it is, yeah, it's just a really cool concept to think about. And I thought that I didn't get a chance to read that until just now. So I was like, oh, this is a great introduction to what we're talking about today. So awesome.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'll go ahead and piggyback off that as I didn't really mention earlier, but I have an IT background in Active Directory networking kind of prior to getting into the cyber world. And I would say my time of transitioning out of a more traditional IT role and getting into cyber was around the time everybody was moving to Office 365 and nobody wanted on-prem Exchange anymore. But obviously, the bigger the company, sometimes the quicker these things move, sometimes the slower they move. So things are still to this day, people are still moving to the cloud, so to speak. But I would say the majority are there. And just thinking about what you're saying, Nate, when I, again, kind of around the time I was transitioning, I was thinking of, WannaCry, right? And that was so many people had
Yeah.
SMB exposed to the internet and didn't think about it. And now everybody thinks like, what a horrible idea because we know something like that could happen. And that was a good way for people to pretty much immediately start getting into everybody's, corporate network. And so now, Topher, to your point, with everybody being in the cloud, from my old school perspective, it's like let's just throw all the domain controllers into one pool, and God forbid something affects one of them, it affects all of them, and they're all in one spot. We really don't have to look that hard for them. So right now, I feel like it's one up to the WannaCry, right? It's now all of the fish are in one barrel instead of having to go search all over the world for them. So that's yeah, that is something. I don't know what could top that, but at the same time, who knows? We have everything going online, cars and houses and cities, and who knows? You know what I mean? But it's also funny because not know actually, obviously, a few minutes prior to getting on, you mentioned you were going to bring this up, but not knowing for sure what we were going to talk about outside of the high level concepts. One of the things I wanted to mention in terms of just general security bypasses is undocumented attacks, right? And this would fall into that category. It's like you said, it was under talked about. The attack itself wasn't even known, but even the components to it were very under discussed and not really publicly like, oh, here's what they're for. And so even some of the things that I do, I've mentioned some of this, what I'm calling server side client coercion, which I hope we could put some information out about soon.
We
So
got we have
yeah,
to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Maybe a blog post, but it's cool. It's the concept of server-side request forgery, but realizing that what you're putting into the web app in terms of a URL is actually launching in a headless browser or some sort of rendering agent, and it gives you way more capability than traditional server-side request forgery. And so when I think about like from a threat, like a threat modeling perspective, how do you defend against that if you've never thought like, oh, I better defend that headless server in my application stack somewhere. So, and this is just one example that I could speak to a little bit more because I've been working through it. But what you brought up, Nate, with is like I don't know what's past critical, but is that example, and that's really what a lot of 0 days are. You don't know what to watch for until people know it's being abused, and so one more, I guess, hit on my legacy kind of IT experience where everything was like antivirus, Sophos, you're good, whatever.
Those
Uh, you
days are
know,
long gone.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, well, then they had to go with, well, signatures change like by the minute, so we can't go off signatures and yada yada. And then it became very much like has to be heuristic and you have to be behavioral and you have to look for anomalies. And that is really, I mean, at the end of the day, and not to say that you can't sneak your traffic to kind of make it not look anomalous. So, um, yeah, a lot of moving pieces to try to hide between the controls.
Fun fact, the very first antiviruses were actually heuristic based.
No kidding. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, but they became too complex to program at the time. So
Uh,
everyone was like, but back then, to your point, right, signatures, everyone's like, well, we'll just hash everything that's bad. And then we went to a signature-based antivirus for a long time. And then those of us that used a lot of MSF Venom back in the day were like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I can just change the hash on whatever
yeah.
payload I have. So
Yeah.
yeah, that didn't last long. But I do run into a lot of people that are in a very big legacy mindset. They have like an ASA from like 12 years ago and signature-based antivirus, right? And they're like, I'm good. I'm fine. I have everything. This is, I'm like, you were solid in 1996. You're not solid in 2025. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, you
if
just have
the world stopped turning in 2006, we would have been good, but alas, yeah.
say nowadays, I think with that tech stack, you're blacklisting everything in AWS, which is half legit and half bad traffic by today's standards. So maybe not half and half. That's a bold statement. But Ron, go ahead, man. I feel like you were going to say something. I cut you off.
No, I was just gonna agree with all of you guys' different points. I do agree that the attack is not anything that's novel, nothing crazy, but that's what most criticals are. They're not. They're really
Yeah.
simple. So they're simplest thing, and that's why they're critical. But I also think, like you said, I think the ways of trying to figure out how to find these things, like Nate said, get a pen test. But also, if you're an internal pen test team, which I've been an internal pen tester as well, track your unknown dependencies, things like that. I mean, you kind of have to do all this research as well and kind of do some testing on your own, because a lot of it is just like tenant isolation. Like, this issue is an authorization bypass, so it's an access control issue. So verifying that cross tenant, issues are making sure you're isolating that is a factor, So I think that's a kind of a problem. But again, if you don't know that exists, it's kind of hard. And even back then, there was a lot of things that people were looking for that, that Microsoft had that they didn't know exist. So you'd have to go read the manual or try to figure out what these components did in order to exploit them. So, I mean, same idea, just hire a pen test continuously. We do continuous pen testing, and I'm sure you'll get someone who will find these things, but also make sure that you're watching for cross tenant, privilege escalation and stuff like that. So those are big issues that I see constantly, especially in cloud.
To actually double down and triply I amplify what Ron just said. Again, to come back to the initial vulnerability that we were talking about, and to kind of marry what Nick said about the WannaCry and the wormability of it, right? In this vulnerability too, there was that capability because with the tokens that you were able to generate, right? Being able to bypass conditional access and any conditional access policy, if you can read a tenant's guest users, you could then be granted the keys to their home tenant, which again, it just is there's that cross tenant, there's that, those implicit trusts that you think are secured because you don't see somebody's um, name or logo when you log into Intra, but right in the back end, all of those the incredibly complex web of all of these different APIs and all of these things, and the keys to being able to interact with those APIs are handled in super or in handled mysteriously. We call it that because you think you understand, or you may even talk, for example, to a vendor, or you're demoing or baking off some products, and they're like, yeah, everybody's going to say that their stuff is secure, and we even use standard libraries or standard trusted protocols. But like we saw again in this blog post, if, for example, there's no logging or you don't have the ability to audit, Ron said, you should be looking for those things. And if you don't have the ability to do that, you would never know. So again, it's attack surface and asset management all the way down. And without that, again, it's just it's you're in for some hurting. So I see we had somebody mentioned in the QA board here, Q&A board, lull bins and the concept of living off the land. Actually, I'm going to ask Topher a question, and please don't come at me uh, because of my question. But I'm curious, just because your experience, the experience window is shifted. And I know when I was sort of cutting my teeth right when I was getting into pen testing, after I was, 4 or 5 years into it, that's sort of when the concept hit the the main line, right? Like everybody knows too, just because it's popular now doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't popular before or that real threat actors haven't been abusing this for any number of years. Um, right? But that concept of living off the land using binaries or using shared normal communication channels like Slack or GitHub or Dropbox, anything that has that sort of server client model, there you can, right, theoretically use that for some covert C2 channel. I'm curious if that
Britney Spears
concept,
Instagram account.
pardon?
Britney Spears Instagram account. You're
Yeah.
pretty familiar, right?
I no, that's what were
Yeah, so
people using
a
that
bunch
in
of
comments?
yeah, so people were actually running C2 using comments on her Instagram account on just random threads.
Yeah. So,
I
okay, so
remember that.
before Instagram, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe I'm talking late 90s, like early 2000s.
sure.
Was the concept of lull bins and using like signed drivers and bringing, right? We haven't even talked about bring your own signed drivers or bring your own C2. But like that concept, right, of abusing internal, already trusted tools, binaries, applications that exist in a gold image in the modern landscape, and then
And
finding a ways like was that around?
yes, so in fact, a lot of times that is all you had. So
Mm.
I mean, literally, like this was before when I was a teenage hacker. We won't really get into that because I don't want the cops joke. But like that, I mean, literally reading manuals, right? Like if you figured out like what network infrastructure they had, and then you would like go online and you'd find some like this was like before PDFs were even that popular. You'd find some sort of text instruction manual on the firewall that they had to see if there was like default credentials or hard coded credentials. And you would have to figure out, what was on every system, what you could use on every system. So I would say it was even more so. Like it was, and you have to
Mm.
even back then, there wasn't a lot of frameworks to enable C2, right? So like you really you didn't really have a mechanism for like exploit payload reverse shell, right? Like that's, you didn't really have that. Like you had to figure out how to get the tools that you needed staged, and you basically had to build your own C2 every time you were doing any kind of engagement or anything like that. So it's kind of crazy to think about because now, lol bins and my favorite, the Linux equivalent GTFO bins,
Yep.
um, like I didn't you didn't have that. You had like Merc chat rooms, you had assembly back then, right? Because buffer overflows were that was like the big deal then, right? So you had to know what like machine code, how it worked and what you were doing and what memory looked like, and you had to abstract all this. And it was often with the programs that were already existing on the system,
Mm.
right? So you didn't really have fancy tools. You had Merc chat, IRC. Um, you had some forums at the time, but it's nothing like today. I would say like probably around that time, the only people that had the infrastructure even to support C2 in any concept would have been like nation state actors, right? So um, it wasn't like today. I'll definitely say that.
Which is, I think, just a funny, call it irony, call it some twisted form of poetic justice, right? I mean, we were there and the industry existed in that space where, you didn't need MSF Venom, or you didn't have PowerShell Empire or Cobalt Strike or Armitage for the OGs, right?
Yes.
Um, you didn't have them maybe because you didn't necessarily need them. Everything that you needed to gain access was already there for you, and then we introduce all of these tools and all these programs, and the landscape
Yeah.
matures.
Escalates back and forth, right? Like you're right. So back in that era, I won't give away my age, but back in that era, security was an afterthought, kind of like how ICS and SCADA and IoT was a couple years ago.
Hmm.
People are finally catching up. But back then, like just standard like desktop network security, total afterthought, right? And it was really easy to do things like hack your school library computer. Um, and like nobody even knew, or nobody was even like the concept of even logging, going back to that, right? Was not there. Like people didn't like review audit logs of what was happening on their networks. Like, and it's so crazy. But as defenses got better, then we built fancy tools and frameworks and we got better. And then, it just continuously goes like this, right? So but it is interesting to think about something that I wanted to talk about today in the concept of this is it's always been about impersonation, right? Like that is the easiest way into any environment, IT or otherwise, really. But when we're talking about security bypassing, that's the key, right? Because we have all these tools that are there and designed to block out who's not supposed to be there. Okay, then I have to pretend like I'm supposed to be there. So that's what most, all of these things that we talk about, even this example, the token example, right, is like, oh, I'm supposed to be in this network. I have
Yeah.
a token, right? So that's really, I think, where the key is. And I think a lot of people are like short-sighted in the fact that like I'm blocking all the bad people, and you're like, yeah, but I'm pretending to be a good person. So you don't know, even like you talked about conditional access and multi-factor, right? I'm just going to pretend to be someone that has rights to the network, and I'm going to send them, an MFA request every 30 seconds for 24 hours until they finally hit yes by accident or out of fatigue, right? And that's a real thing, for
Absolutely.
those
I
out there,
have
right?
push fatigue in my notes. Yep.
Yeah.
I know it's an
Yep.
old school, but it still works, man. So
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
eventually get annoyed, but I don't want to side rail the conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's all I was going to say. And that's been the case like for decades, right? Is it's just impersonate the good guys. That's the key to getting past security, really. It's kind of like the short version for me anyway.
Yeah, and for defenders, that's where I kind of hit that like behavioral analysis on your everything. Unfortunately, I don't know, it probably means something slightly different for every organization, but to your point, if you are posing as somebody that is allowed, but you're doing something they've never done in their 18 months or their last 24 months, and all of a sudden 300, pushes go out, like that is the big red flag. Like, sure, no virus hit the network, you're posing as somebody you're supposed to be, like so. I had a very short stint as like a SOC analyst, and so I'm always thinking, how would I catch, this thing? And a lot of it came down to just like the behavior has clearly changed. Something is out of place. But even in the case of this Microsoft one, I mean, if there's no logs, what do you watch? And then I guess that goes back to what Ron is saying, which is like proactivity, threat hunting, kind of that area between threat hunting and just pen testing. Knowing what to look for almost before you need to look for it. And it is tricky. And I guess that's why we all have careers doing what we
Yep.
do here.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, when I was a security engineer, that was kind of our thing, 24/7, eyes on glass. You always had somebody proactively looking at things and doing threat hunting. That was my main job. No matter what else I did, was to threat hunt and make sure that I was looking for those things proactively, even if it wasn't law. I needed to make sure that I was monitoring those things. And like you said, behavioral analysis is very important. So to make sure that you're actually, checking on those things and making sure that everything is good. So threat hunting is very important. And I agree with that.
And I think, to the point, and to Nate's point earlier, right? There's so many layers of abstraction. Everything's so complex now. And you don't necessarily need to look or have a log of the activity, but what is the goal of the threat actor? And what are they going to do in your network? That's what you need to look for, right? If you have no way of tracking them up until that point, then what's changed? Is it business email compromise? Are you checking like your sent folders and deleted emails and looking at all these places that are the end state, like the artifacts from their
Mm.
from their activities, right? And not necessarily the activities that led up to that. Now that makes defense more tricky because obviously you want to catch them as early in the attack chain as possible.
sure.
But it's not to say that you can't catch their activities after the fact and then kind of look back and see if there's a way that you could have caught that attack chain prior to that happening. But that's kind of like what I generally say from a defensive point of view, from like a purple teaming point of view, is you're always going to catch something, and that means maybe your files are being encrypted because you're getting ransom, but that
You
means you
found
caught
out.
the threat actor, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, there's always some goal or something right in mind to what the end state is. So that, might be later in the attack chain, but you always have stuff to look for.
Everybody sees the domain admin account creation nowadays, right? And the question usually after that is, wait, how did that happen? Like, okay. And that's when you go looking for the artifacts you're talking about. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And it's what's nice when, again, when you work with pen testing firm, they usually could tell you exactly what they did and hopefully when they did it. And then you have to go into your, hopefully some sort of organized log system, a SIM or something, and cross correlate. No, we should create some sort of alarm now because those 3 logs or 3 actions did something. And to your point, they're artifacts of the attack we wish we would have caught sooner. Let's make sure we do that next time.
Right. Absolutely.
Which I
So
think is
great point.
it's also, yeah, definitely a great point. And I think, you know, I'm going to take a step back here. We are talking, we have a mix of red teaming, pen testing, blue teaming, purple teaming, right? All the colors. But then like you also get into more of like the detection engineering side where I think I think we would all be really good. Maybe I'm just a slight ego statement there, but I think we would also be good at doing things like detection engineering where we could say, not just to a blue team, this is what you need to look out for. It's all of the things, right? It's looking at the ingredient list for a cake and knowing that that's going into the oven and it's going to produce that end result, whether that's, domain compromise, that's going to produce a cake. Here's how you should look out for somebody assembling all the ingredients to make that cake. And
You're
so I
making me
think,
hungry.
I
You're
know,
making me hungry.
It is lunchtime.
All this talk about cake.
Yeah.
Sorry.
it's cake or cookies or
Dang.
sushi, something else. Yeah. But I just think like the the overlap, right, is like really cool because from the detection engineering standpoint of, right, just being able to fill in those gaps of, yeah, you've got your red team, your blue team, even you have your purple team, right? Like those are all I feel like they exist in their discrete spaces, but then you get something like detection engineering that maybe helps drive, change between all of those, and you add threat hunting on top of that, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's you're moving towards a much better place. But again, I'm also a realist too.
Yeah.
That's not the major. That's like cannot be the case for the majority of organizations out there.
I think like tide teaming, so in my mind, being on purple teams, right? Like tide teaming, threat intelligence detection engineering teams, right, are should be a component of purple teaming, but I think that doesn't happen a lot. And I think purple in people's minds, it's like this attack happens. How do I defend against this attack? Less so, how do I detect this attack early in the attack chain, right? And so I think that's to your point. My old commander used to call them stovepipes of excellence. That there's all these teams that are great on their own, but they don't communicate and cross communicate, and they don't, share even threat intelligence and these teams that come up with detections and write new signatures and write new heuristics. It's be more useful if it was in the hands of the SOC
Yeah.
analyst. But
Yeah.
sometimes that doesn't happen. So absolutely agree with that. And yeah, I think you guys would be great tide teams.
Something you just said made me think of a time where I was a security analyst and managing Alien Vault SIM, and it had an open source threat feed, and somebody had kind of just took their whole attack package, which included, of course, some NS lookups using Google's IP. So now Google's 8.8.8 .8 is apparently malicious, and
Oh
that
man.
that threat feed got blasted to everybody with an Alien Vault, live threat feed, and
Yep.
just alarms were going off every time an NS. I'm sorry, every time somebody was using Google's DNS, and a lookup happened, an alarm happened, a lookup happened, and oh my gosh, it was a pretty hectic day. We figured out pretty quickly what had happened, but to your point about sometimes the knowledge is too in a column. So,
Right.
so
Absolutely. I think, OTX still exists, by the way.
yeah, okay, you know what I'm
It
talking
does. Yeah, yeah.
about.
And
Cool.
I mean, and I use it,
Yeah, a lot of
but
good stuff too, obviously, but
well, but that's the funny thing is anyone, it's also community source. So like anyone can publish their own threat feed. And
you're
what
right.
you have to do and where a threat intelligence professional comes into play is you have to be able to distinguish who just put 8.8.8.8 on there and what is an actual good threat feed, like, right? And so you're not pulling in that garbage and not like just alerting on everything. And because I think that that's actually, the red teamer in me is like, huh, that might
Perfect.
actually be a good
Distraction, right? Yeah.
I
Hmm.
was just
good
about to just say
distraction.
that. That
Yep.
would be
I think
great.
we all thought it. Yeah, we're all like, hold on. The smoke's coming out of the ears, right? We're all like, hold on a minute. But no, I agree. Yeah, definitely interesting. And yeah, I have a couple things about EDR bypass. I know it's random and it's not going to be any like, hey, here's go and do this and you'll guarantee bypass anything. But just
No,
some,
that's always
this
a
is,
good topic too. So,
yeah, everybody likes it. You get on the endpoint, and sometimes that's where you get stuck, right? You're bouncing around the network, and you're just stuck privesking on a endpoint or whatever, doing something that's clearly getting flagged. I'm not saying this is going to always work, but just a couple things I've personally witnessed happen. Just finding assets on the network, right? And we've talked about that asset tracking. What's on the assets, right? Do you actually have your EDR on every asset? Because sometimes it only takes one asset. You logged in with the domain admin one time just to set up the machine. Now you have cached creds on that machine. You forgot to put the EDR on that one machine, and that's the one we find and dump out the domain creds. I've seen it happen. I've also seen it where, okay, we did remember to get everything deployed. We have very little to no assets that are missing EDR, but we left a few in monitor only mode. So no prevention, maybe an alarm goes off, but by that point, I mean, that's telling you somebody already did damage, usually. And so you have the creds at that point. You're trying to move quick, especially in more of those red team style engagements where just, sometimes they'll even tell you they're in monitor only mode as long as you have any sort of foothold, which is always a good sign to see. And then I had a really crazy one happen, and I won't mention the company, but they're definitely one of the, I guess, four big EDR companies out there. And it's we had a customer, we did a pen test, a bunch of real obvious, pretty bad, like Metasploit out of the box stuff worked. Privask was like auto Privask with Metasploit kind of payload. It was like, wow, this should work on, I guess, a Windows machine with Defender turned off. It was pretty out of the box attack, and it all worked. And they had EDR on there, and so my first thought is, okay, probably was in monitor only mode. That wasn't the case. So my thought was, okay, maybe their policy is somewhat conflicted and allowed for what I, did to happen because it was in some sort of weird policy. And that wasn't the case either. And we ended up getting on a support call with our customer and with the EDR vendor. And they basically said, oh, I guess something was wrong with the whole tenant. Sorry. And so that's nothing we could control as red teamers, or you could control as, I guess, defenders if you aren't really running the cloud tenant yourself. And so that's maybe a good point there isn't like, oh no, what are you going to do in that case? It's really a good, argument for security and layers again, or defense in depth. If all your defense relies on EDR and there's one thing wrong with EDR, like not a good place to put all your eggs. Maybe a lot of them, sure, especially on the endpoints. Definitely don't miss it. Definitely have it, but all the eggs should never be in one basket. So there's my ADR rant. It was the only thing left on my notes. We did a quick thing on duo push. We did a quick thing on undocumented attacks. That was how we started. That's all I had left, guys. Anything else for you guys?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, that's interesting that you point that out. And this goes even back to our first conversation is when somebody else controls your infrastructure, where are those gaps, right? And that's such a cloud complexity issue. But I remember, when S3 sites first came out, they defaulted to public, right? And that's something
Yep.
that cost a lot. And then even today, something that you see a lot is brand new EC2 instances that have 22 open publicly, right? They have SSH public. And so if you've got other credentials or credentialed information and somebody spins up a new EC2 instance and you're like, you can get instant access, right? And so people default configuration, I think, is something that that I think also struggles or people struggle with. And then the only other point I was going to make on that is we hear this all the time, both on the defensive and the offensive side. I only want to scope my servers,
Yeah.
right? And so to your point with EDR, I used to sell EDR right before I came here at Sprocket too. I only want to put it on my servers. And you could tell them, most attacks originate on a user endpoint these days. So shouldn't it be there so you can catch it earlier in the attack chain? No, 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 no. The important stuff is on the server. So um, if any of you have any comments on that, I'm sure we'd love to hear that too.
Well, my very first initial, reaction would be, oh man, if only the real threat actors thought that way too, right? I mean, just, it's, I mean, to some degree, I don't know. The logic is not particularly sound, especially thinking about it critically, all other things aside. I mean, yeah, that also sort of ties into scope issues. And, I understand, some customers, we only want you to touch these assets between 9 and 5. And I get it, right? That's trying to maintain, no business disruptions and all of those things. But I think there's a larger gap between the unwillingness to do that and the likelihood that it can happen during a normal pen test. So yeah, I mean the gaps between what you want tested versus the ultimate goal of a pen test or any red team or any of these, offensive security exercises is to highlight risk, is to help the customer before it's too late. And, there's obviously some conflicting, there's some conflict sometimes between what they feel needs to be tested versus the reality of the situation that, you know, yeah, the Cozy Bear
Computer.
does not care.
Yeah, and computers are
Yeah,
networked, right? And
Yeah. Yeah,
nobody cares.
exactly.
Nobody cares.
nope,
Yeah.
nope.
I guess just to go back to something with you guys, since we were talking about EDR, I just funny story. I mean, well, I guess it's funny. But see, I started from a development standpoint. I did a lot of different things, IT, but really as into development. So, when I do red teams, I kind of just to bypass EDR. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do that, but I like to go through applications because that's the thing I'm going to see first, right? So funny thing is a big power grid that we were testing. We go through their application, get into one of their corporate systems, and the goal is to get to the back one of their backend systems. But they had EDR, but they never seen us because we dropped the payload, got SQL injection, dropped the payload. Also got dropped some payloads on their anonymous SMB server, which I don't know why, and then use spawn PowerShell because obviously they had app blocker on there, so that would have issues if we didn't have a signed binary. So we used PowerShell the whole time, and they never saw anything we were doing. And then we had execution on that, so we could execute, and they never logged that as well. So screw EDR. They never really care about that because I used their application to get through, and then I use what we call, law bins. We use what they already had on the system, and I just was writing code, writing scripts in PowerShell to execute in memory to bypass all of those things. So again, I think I'm not saying it's just totally easy. There's a lot of ways to do it, but these are just still things that we're harping on to keep track of. Even with applications, it's not just network because everything is written as an application. Everything is code. So being able to monitor those as well and seeing that, it's easy to bypass things when you understand how these things work. So I just wanted to give a EDR story because I thought that was funny, and we totally screwed them, but they never saw it coming through their application. So that's another good thing that the attackers love to do, and we love to do that as well.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to sort of start to wrap this up and a wonderful suggestion on a future topic. I think that would be good too. Anytime you get a group full of hackers or anybody who's excited about their profession, we could talk all day and have all different types of stories and pontificate on all different types of things. So I know we're a little bit over on time now. If there's any other questions that we could very quickly answer, otherwise, Topher just also sent another link to his earlier reference. I'm judging just by the by the BBC domain. That's probably the Instagram. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, whoa.
I figured that. So,
It's crazy. It's crazy.
well, great. Yeah. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining and spending your Friday afternoon with us. We are for sure to have more of these in the future. So please, if you know find time to hang out with Sprocket on a Friday afternoon, we're always happy to have you. Um, outside of that, I'll sign off.
All right.
Take
Bye,
care,
Have a
guys.
good one.
everybody. Thanks all.